The warning lights flashed red across the control room as Commander Jake Morrison gripped his chair tightly. The ship was falling fast through the atmosphere of an unknown planet, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sparks flew from damaged control panels while the crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to save their lives. "Hull temperature is rising too fast," shouted Lieutenant Amy Watson from her engineering station. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. The ship was not built for this kind of emergency landing. "Can we slow down the descent?" Jake asked, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. The planet below them looked completely empty, with no signs of water or life anywhere. "I'm trying, Captain," Amy replied, sweat running down her face. "But the main engines are not responding. Something hit us hard up there, and now most of our systems are failing." Dr. Kevin Palmer, the team science officer, looked up from his readings with a worried expression. "The surface scans show this planet has breathable air, but there's no water anywhere, no oceans, no rivers, nothing. Just sand and rocks as far as the sensors can reach." Jake felt his stomach drop. A water shortage would be worse than a damaged ship. Humans could survive many things, but not without water. "How long can we last with our current water supplies?" he asked. "Maybe 3 days if we're careful," Palmer answered. "The water recycling system took damage when we were hit. We're running on emergency reserves now." The ship shook violently as they hit the upper atmosphere. Jake could hear metal groaning under the stress. Through the main window he could see the planet's surface getting closer. Red sand dunes stretched in every direction, with no sign of civilization or water sources. "Prepare for crash landing," Jake ordered. "Everyone secure your stations and brace for impact." The crew quickly fastened their safety harnesses and prepared for the worst. Jake looked around at his 12 crew members, all good people who had volunteered for this exploration mission. They had been mapping the outer regions of space when the solar storm hit, damaging their navigation and forcing them to this unknown world. 30 seconds to impact," Amy called out. The ship was shaking so hard now that Jake could barely see the control panels. He said a silent prayer that they would all survive the landing. The crash came with a sound like thunder. The ship hit the sand hard, bounced once, then slid for what felt like miles before finally coming to rest. Jake's head hit the back of his chair, and for a moment everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, the ship was quiet except for the hum of emergency power. Dust particles floated in the air, and several control panels were completely dark. But they were alive, and that was what mattered most. "Sound off," Jake called out, unbuckling his harness. "Everyone report in." One by one, his crew members confirmed they were alive. Lieutenant Susan Clark had a small cut on her forehead, and Engineer Bobby Martinez had bruised ribs, but everyone could move and work. It was better than Jake had dared to hope. "Amy, give me a damage report," Jake said, standing up carefully. His legs felt shaky, but he needed to take charge of the situation. Amy was already working at her station, checking the ship's systems. "The main engines are completely destroyed. Life support is running on backup power, which gives us maybe 2 days before it fails. The hull has breaches in 3 places, but they're not critical yet." "What about the water recycling system?" Jake asked, dreading the answer. "Gone," Amy replied sadly. "The impact destroyed most of the main systems. We're down to whatever water we have in storage, plus what's in the emergency tanks." Dr. Palmer was checking his equipment, trying to get more detailed readings of their surroundings. "Captain, the air outside is breathable, but the temperature is going to be a problem. It's already over 100 degrees, and it's still morning here." Jake walked to the main window and looked out at their new world. The landscape was harsh and empty, nothing but sand dunes and rock formations under a blazing sun. In the distance, he could see strange rock pillars that looked almost like they had been carved by intelligent beings, but there was no movement anywhere. "We need to make a plan," Jake said, turning back to his crew. "First priority is water. We need to find some, or figure out how to make it last longer. Second priority is getting a distress signal out and hoping someone hears it. Lieutenant Clark was already working on the communication system. I can get the emergency beacon working, but our main communications are damaged. If anyone's listening, they'll know we're here, but we can't talk to them. That's better than nothing, Jake said. Get it working as soon as possible. He looked around at his crew again. These were good people, skilled and brave. They had all known the risks when they signed up for exploration duty. But knowing the risks and facing them were two different things. Dr. Palmer, I need you to keep monitoring the environment. Look for any signs of water, even underground. Amy, work on the life support systems. See if you can make them last longer. Everyone else, help with repairs and start rationing the water we have left. The crew went to work with quiet determination. Jake knew they were scared, but they were also professionals. They would do their jobs and trust him to find a way out of this mess. As the day wore on, the heat outside became unbearable. The ship's cooling systems were barely working, and Jake could see his crew getting tired from the hot, dry air. They had been careful with the water, but it was disappearing faster than he had hoped. Captain, Dr. Palmer called out near the end of the day, I'm picking up something strange on the sensors. There's movement out there about 5 miles to the north. Jake hurried to Palmer's station and looked at the readings. Something was definitely moving across the sand, something big. Can you tell what it is? He asked. Not from here, Palmer replied, but it's moving in a pattern like it's intelligent. And Captain, there's more than one of them. Jake felt a chill despite the heat. They were not alone on this planet. Whether that was good news or bad news remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and their water was running out fast. The second day brought no relief from the crushing heat. Jake Morrison stood at the damaged window of his ship, watching the sun climb higher into the alien sky. His crew had worked through the night trying to repair systems, but progress was slow. The water situation was getting worse by the hour. Captain, you need to see this, Lieutenant Susan Clark called from her communications station. Her voice carried a note of excitement mixed with concern. Jake walked over to where Clark was pointing at her screen. The motion sensors were showing clear movement patterns across the desert, getting closer to their position. 3 distinct objects were approaching from the north, moving in a way that suggested intelligence rather than random wandering. How far out are they? Jake asked, studying the readings. Maybe 2 hours at their current speed, Clark replied. And Captain, they're not moving like any vehicles I've ever seen. The pattern is too smooth? Too flowing? Dr. Kevin Palmer joined them at the communications station, his scanner in hand. I'm detecting metallic signatures, but also something else. Organic readings mixed with the mechanical ones. Whatever's coming, it's not entirely artificial. Jake felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. First contact with an alien species was something every space explorer dreamed about, but not under these circumstances. His crew was already stressed from the crash and the heat, and their water supplies were dwindling fast. Amy, how are the repairs coming? He called to the engineering station. Still working on life support? Amy Watson answered without looking up. The cooling system is barely functional, and the water recycling is a total loss. We're down to maybe 30 hours of water if we keep rationing. Jake nodded grimly. 30 hours was not enough time to wait for rescue, even if their distress signal was being heard. They needed help, and it looked like help might be coming to them. Everyone, stay calm, Jake announced to his crew. We might have visitors soon. I want all weapons secured and everyone on their best behavior. This could be our chance to get help. The next 2 hours passed slowly. Jake had the crew take turns watching the approaching objects through the ship's external cameras. As they got closer, more details became visible. The vehicles seemed to flow across the sand rather than roll or hover. They moved with an organic grace that was both beautiful and unsettling. They're slowing down, Clark reported. Now about half a mile out and moving more carefully. Jake could see them clearly now through the main window. 3 sleek craft that seemed to be made of some kind of living metal. They pulsed with soft blue light and moved like water flowing over the sand. As they came to rest near the crashed ship, Jake got his first look at their occupants. The beings that emerged from the craft were unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. They stood about 7 feet tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Their bodies were thin and graceful, with long limbs that moved with fluid precision. But what caught Jake's attention immediately was how they moved. Several of them were stumbling, their elegant motion disrupted by obvious weakness. "They look sick," Dr. Palmer observed, adjusting his medical scanner. "I'm reading elevated stress levels and signs of severe dehydration." Jake watched as one of the aliens collapsed onto the sand, its companions rushing to help it stand. The situation was becoming clear. These beings were in the same desperate condition as his own crew. They needed water just as badly. The apparent leader of the group approached the ship's main airlock. It was taller than the others, with crystalline formations growing from its shoulders that caught the light like jewels. When it spoke, the ship's translation system picked up the words and converted them into English. "Greetings, travelers from the sky," the alien said, its voice musical but strained. "I am Zephyr of the Flowing Sands. We detected your vessel's distress and have come to offer assistance, though I fear we bring little hope." Jake activated the external speakers, his mind racing. These beings had come to help, but they were clearly suffering themselves. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the exploration vessel Columbia. We appreciate your offer of help, but it looks like you might need assistance too." "Your observation is correct," Zephyr replied, its voice growing weaker. "The great drought has lasted 7 of our seasonal cycles. Our water reserves are nearly gone, and many of my people are dying. We hoped you might possess knowledge of water finding that could save both our peoples." Through the window, Jake could see more aliens arriving. Some had to be carried by their companions, their blue skin taking on a grayish tint that suggested serious illness. The sight reminded him of his own crew's deteriorating condition. "How many of you are there?" Jake asked. 43 souls remain," Zephyr answered. "We were once a great caravan of traders, but the drought has taken most of our number. We have perhaps 1 day of water left, if we are careful." Jake felt his heart sink. Instead of finding salvation, they had encountered others in the same desperate situation. But looking at his crew, he saw determination rather than despair. These were humans, and humans had a long history of finding solutions when none seemed to exist. "We're in a similar situation," Jake told Zephyr honestly. "Our water recycling system was damaged in the crash. We have maybe 30 hours of water left for my crew of 13. "Then we are all doomed," Zephyr said sadly. "The nearest water source is 5 days' journey across the burning sands. None of us have the strength to make such a crossing." Dr. Palmer stepped forward, his medical training taking over. "Captain, I'd like to help their injured if possible. Maybe we can learn something about their physiology that might help us find a solution," Jake nodded. "Zephyr, my medical officer, would like to examine your people. We don't have much, but we'll share what we can." "Your kindness honors us," Zephyr replied, "though I fear it will only prolong our suffering." As Dr. Palmer prepared to go outside, Jake gathered his crew. The situation had changed dramatically. They were no longer just fighting for their own survival, but for the lives of dozens of alien beings who had come to help them. The responsibility was enormous, but Jake knew his crew would not give up. "People, we have a new mission," Jake announced. "We're going to find a way to save everyone. I don't know how yet, but humans have a talent for the impossible. We're going to prove that." Today, the 3rd day dawned with no mercy from the blazing suns above. Jake Morrison had barely slept, spending most of the night watching over both his crew and the alien refugees who had made camp beside their crashed ship. The situation was worse than he had feared it would be. Dr. Kevin Palmer emerged from the makeshift medical area they had set up in the ship's cargo bay. His face was grim as he approached Jake with his latest findings. The aliens were dying faster than the humans, and there was little they could do to help. Captain, I've examined 12 of their people now, Palmer reported quietly. Their biology is completely different from ours. They need almost 3 times as much water as humans to keep their bodies working properly. Jake looked through the window at the alien camp. Several of the beings hadn't moved for hours, lying motionless on the sand while their companions tried to keep them comfortable. The sight filled him with a determination he hadn't felt since the crash. How long do they have? Jake asked. Some of them might not make it through today, Palmer answered. Their skin is turning gray, which seems to be a sign of severe dehydration. Zephyr is holding up better than most, but even he's getting weaker. Amy Watson looked up from her repair work, sweat covering her face despite the ship's struggling air conditioning. Captain, I've got bad news about the water recycling system. It's not just damaged, it's completely destroyed. Even if we had all the right parts, it would take weeks to rebuild it. Jake felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. 56 lives depended on finding water where none existed. His crew was rationing their supplies carefully, but they were all showing signs of dehydration. The aliens were in even worse shape, and time was running out fast. What about the atmospheric readings? Jake asked Palmer. You mentioned something yesterday about moisture in the air. Palmer nodded and pulled up his data on a portable scanner. There's actually quite a bit of water vapor in the atmosphere, especially during the cooler night hours. The problem is that neither our technology nor theirs is designed to extract water from vapor. We need liquid water sources. Lieutenant Susan Clark called out from her communications station. Captain, Zephyr is asking to speak with you. He says it's urgent. Jake made his way to the main airlock where the alien leader was waiting. Zephyr's, condition had gotten much worse overnight. The graceful being now moved slowly and with obvious pain, his blue skin taking on the same gray tint Palmer had described. Captain Morrison, Zephyr said, his musical voice now barely above a whisper. I must speak with you about a difficult decision my people have made. What kind of decision? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. We have decided to attempt the journey to the old water caches, Zephyr explained. They are located in the Stone Mountains, 3 days' travel from here. We know that most of us will not survive the crossing, but perhaps a few of the strongest might reach water. Jake felt his heart sink. That's suicide. You said yourself that nobody has the strength for a 5-day journey. 3 days, Zephyr. Corrected. The caches are closer than the natural springs. But you are correct that it is likely death for most of us. However, staying here is certain death for all. Don't give up yet, Jake said firmly. We're humans. We have a reputation for finding solutions when there shouldn't be any. Zephyr looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold both hope and despair. Your species intrigues me, Captain. Even facing death, you speak of solutions. But what solution could exist here, in this wasteland where even the rocks are dry? Jake stared out at the endless desert, his mind racing. There had to be something they were missing, some angle they hadn't considered. Humans had survived in impossible conditions before by thinking differently, by seeing possibilities others couldn't imagine. Tell me about your people's technology, Jake said. What can your vehicles do besides travel? They are designed for long journeys across difficult terrain, Zephyr replied. They can regulate temperature, provide shelter, and process food, but they cannot create water from nothing. What about power sources? Jake pressed. How do they generate energy? Solar collectors and thermal converters, Zephyr answered. They draw energy from heat and light. Very efficient for desert travel. Jake felt a spark of an idea beginning to form. Thermal converters. That means they can work with temperature differences, right? Yes, they use the difference between hot and cold to generate power, Zephyr confirmed. But I do not see how. This helps our water problem. Jake turned to look back at his crew, who were watching the conversation with growing interest. Amy had stopped her repair work and was listening intently. Dr. Palmer was checking his atmospheric readings again, and Jake could see the wheels turning in his mind. Palmer, those moisture readings? Jake called out. How much water vapor is actually in the air? Quite a bit, actually, Palmer replied, walking over with his scanner. The atmospheric humidity is around 40%, even in this heat. At night, when it cools down, it goes up to nearly 70%. And what happens to water vapor when it gets cold? Jake asked, his excitement growing. It condenses back into liquid water, Palmer answered, his eyes widening as he realized what Jake was thinking. Captain, are you suggesting what I think? You're suggesting. Jake looked at Amy, who was already nodding as she understood the direction of his thoughts. Amy, could we build some kind of condensation system using the ship's parts and the alien technology? It would be complicated, Amy said slowly, but maybe we'd need to create temperature differentials big enough to force the water vapor out of the air. The ship's thermal regulation systems might work if we could modify them. Zephyr was listening to the conversation with growing amazement. You think you can pull water from the air itself? It's been done before on other worlds, Jake said. The trick is having the right equipment and enough power to create the temperature differences we need. Our vehicles have powerful thermal converters, Zephyr said, his voice stronger now with renewed hope. If your people can design such a system, we can provide the energy to run it. Jake felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried him through many dangerous situations. Then we're going to try. Amy, I need you to start figuring out what parts we can use from the ship. Palmer, keep monitoring the atmospheric conditions. We're going to pull water out of thin air. As his crew began to work with renewed purpose, Jake allowed himself a moment of hope. They were still in desperate trouble, but now they had a plan. It was crazy, dangerous, and might not work. But it was typically human to try the impossible when the alternative was giving up. Jake Morrison gathered his crew in the main corridor of their damaged ship, looking at each tired face around him. The plan was crazy, but it was their only chance to save everyone. Amy Watson stood beside him with her engineering tools, while Dr. Palmer held his atmospheric scanner ready to help with calculations. Listen up, everyone, Jake began, his voice carrying the authority that had gotten them through the crash. We're going to attempt something that's never been tried before. We're going to build a water condensation system using parts from our ship and power from the alien vehicles. Lieutenant Danny Roberts, the ship's environmental systems expert, stepped forward with interest. Captain, I've been thinking about this since you mentioned it. The ship's thermal regulation panels could work as collection surfaces if we position them correctly. Explain it to everyone, Jake said, knowing that the whole crew needed to understand the plan to make it work. Water vapor is always in the air, Danny continued. When warm air hits a cold surface, the water vapor turns back into liquid water. That's how it forms on grass in the morning. We need to create the same effect, but on a much larger scale. Amy nodded enthusiastically. I can strip the thermal panels from the ship's hull. They're designed to handle extreme temperature changes, which is exactly what we need. If we arrange them in the right pattern, we can maximize the surface area for water collection. Dr. Palmer was already working on his scanner, running calculations. Based on the atmospheric readings, we should be able to collect significant amounts of water during the cooler night hours. The humidity rises dramatically after sunset. Jake felt the familiar surge of pride in his crew's abilities. This was what humans did best, taking impossible situations and finding creative solutions. What about power requirements? He asked. Amy, that's where the alien technology comes in, Amy replied. Zephyr said their vehicles have powerful thermal converters. We can use those to create the temperature differentials we need. Cold on one side, hot on the other, and water vapor will condense on the cold surfaces. Lieutenant Bobby Martinez, who had been quiet until now, raised his hand. Captain, what about collection containers? We need something to catch the water. As it drips down, we'll use everything we can find, Jake answered. Emergency supply containers, medical equipment, anything that can hold water. The key is to not waste a single drop. Susan Clark looked up from her communications station. How long will this take to build, and how much water can we expect to collect? Amy considered the question carefully. If we work through the night, we might have a basic system ready by tomorrow evening. As for water collection, that depends on how well we can engineer the temperature differences. Dr. Palmer studied his readings again. In ideal conditions, we might be able to collect 20 to 30 gallons in a single night. That would be enough to keep everyone alive for several more days. Jake felt hope growing stronger. Then we start now. Amy, begin removing the thermal panels from the ship's hull. Danny, help her figure out the best arrangement. Palmer, I need you to monitor atmospheric conditions and help optimize our collection timing. The crew scattered to their tasks with renewed energy. Jake watched as Amy and Danny began the careful work of removing the ship's thermal regulation panels. These panels were designed to keep the ship's temperature stable in space. But they would serve a new purpose now. Outside, Zephyr and several of his people watched with curiosity as the humans began dismantling parts of their ship. Jake went to explain the plan to the alien leader, who listened with growing amazement. "You are willing to damage your own vessel to save us," Zephyr said, his voice filled with wonder. "This is not something my people would have considered." "Different situations call for different solutions," Jake replied. "Right now, getting off this planet doesn't matter if we're all dead from dehydration." "How can we help?" Zephyr asked. "Our vehicles are at your disposal, and my people will do whatever is needed." Jake looked at the alien vehicles, their sleek forms pulsing with soft blue light. "We'll need to position your vehicles to provide power at specific locations. Amy will show you exactly where when she's ready." As the day wore on, the improvised water collection system began to take shape. The thermal panels were arranged in a complex pattern around the crash site, angled to catch the maximum amount of cool night air. Amy had calculated the optimal positioning to create the temperature differentials needed for condensation. "The panels need to be cold on the top surface and warmer underneath," Amy explained to Zephyr. "Your thermal converters can create that difference by drawing heat from the bottom while allowing the top to cool naturally." Zephyr studied the arrangement with obvious admiration. "Your people think in ways that are foreign to us. We have always sought to find water, never to create it from air itself." Dr. Palmer joined them, carrying his latest atmospheric readings. "The humidity is starting to rise as the temperature drops. We should begin the first test run soon." Jake looked at the system his crew had built in just one day. It was rough and improvised, held together with salvaged parts and determination. But it represented something much more important than just a water collection device. It represented the human refusal to accept defeat. "Fire it up," Jake ordered. Amy activated the ship's remaining power systems while Zephyr's people positioned their vehicles around the thermal panels. The alien thermal converters hummed to life, creating the temperature differentials that would, hopefully, pull water from the desert air. At first, nothing happened. The panels sat silently in the gathering darkness, and Jake felt his heart sink. Then Dr. Palmer called out excitedly from his monitoring station. "It's working!" Palmer shouted. "I'm detecting moisture condensation on the panel surfaces." Jake hurried to the nearest panel and saw tiny droplets of water beginning to form on the cold metal surface. They were small at first, but they grew larger as more water vapor condensed from the air. Soon, the droplets were rolling down the panels into the collection containers below. "My people," Zephyr said softly, "you have accomplished something we thought impossible. You have found water where none existed." Jake watched as more water collected in their improvised containers. It was slow work, but it was working. Drop by drop, they were pulling life from the barren air of this desert world. "This is just the beginning," Jake said, feeling genuine hope for the first time since the crash. "By morning, we should have enough water to keep everyone alive for another day, and tomorrow night we'll collect even more." The crew worked through the night, monitoring the system and making adjustments to improve its efficiency. As dawn approached, Jake looked at their collection containers with satisfaction. They had gathered nearly 15 gallons of water, enough to make a real difference in their survival chances. The sun rose on the fourth day to reveal a sight that filled Jake Morrison with pride and hope. The water condensation system stretched across the desert sand like a complex web of metal and alien technology. Thermal panels gleamed in the morning. light, still dripping precious water into collection containers that had been nearly empty just hours before Dr. Kevin Palmer approached Jake with the most encouraging report he had given since the crash. "Captain, the system collected 18 gallons during the night. That's enough to stabilize both our crew and the aliens for at least 2 more days." Jake looked at the alien camp where Zephyr's people were moving with Renuji. Several aliens who had been barely alive the day before were now sitting up and taking small sips of the condensed water. The gray tint was fading from their blue skin, replaced by a healthier shimmer. "How are they responding to the water?" Jake asked Palmer. "Better than I hoped," Palmer replied with a smile. "Their biology is remarkably efficient at recovery once they start getting proper hydration. Even small amounts of water seem to help them dramatically." Amy Watson emerged from the condensation system where she had been making improvements throughout the night. Her face was tired but satisfied as she reported on the system's performance. "Captain, I think we can increase efficiency by another 20%, Amy said. "I've figured out how to better angle the panels to catch more moisture, and Zephyr's people have shown me how to optimize their thermal converters." Jake felt a surge of gratitude for his crew's dedication. They had worked through exhaustion and dehydration to build something that shouldn't have been possible. "How much water do you think we can collect tonight?" he asked. "If everything works as planned, maybe 25 gallons, Amy answered. "That would give us enough breathing room to really stabilize everyone's condition." Zephyr approached them, moving with much more grace than he had shown in days. The alien leader's crystalline shoulder formations were beginning to glow with their natural light again, a sign that his health was improving. "Captain Morrison," Zephyr said, his musical voice stronger now, "what your people have accomplished defies everything we thought we knew about survival in the desert. You have created water from nothing." "Not from nothing," Jake corrected. "The water was always there in the air. We just found a way to collect it." "That is precisely what amazes us," Zephyr continued. "We have technology that can reshape landscapes and move mountains, yet we could not see the solution that existed all around us. Your people think differently than we do." Dr. Palmer joined the conversation, his scientific curiosity evident. "Zephyr, if you don't mind me asking, how did your people survive in the desert before the Great Drought?" "We have always depended on the deep springs and underground rivers," Zephyr explained. "Our technology is built around finding and extracting water from underground sources. The idea of taking water from the air itself never occurred to us." Jake understood the difference in thinking. The aliens had developed advanced technology for their traditional methods, but humans had learned to adapt and improvise. When traditional methods failed, humans looked for new approaches. "There's wisdom in adaptation," Jake said. "Sometimes the best solutions come from combining different ways of thinking." As the day progressed, the water collection system continued to prove its worth. The crew made continuous improvements, adjusting panel angles and optimizing the thermal converters for maximum efficiency. By sunset, they had refined the system to work better than Jake had dared to hope, activating the system for night collection. Amy announced as darkness fell across the desert. The alien vehicles hummed to life around the thermal panels, creating the temperature differences needed to pull water from the increasingly humid night air. Jake watched as water droplets began forming on the cold panel surfaces almost immediately. The system was working better than ever, and he could see hope returning to faces that had been marked by despair just days before. "Captain," Lieutenant Susan Clark called from her communications station, "I'm picking up signals on long-range scanners. Multiple ships approaching our position." Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Rescue ships?" he asked. "Looks like it," Clark confirmed. "Human Federation vessels and what appear to be alien ships as well. They should reach us within 2 days." The news spread quickly through both camps, but Jake was surprised to find that relief was mixed with something else. The condensation system represented more than just survival. It represented a new understanding between 2 very different species. "Zephyr," Jake said, finding the alien leader near the water collection area. "When your people's ships arrive, I'd like to share the complete plans for this system with them." You would give us this knowledge freely? Zephyr asked with obvious amazement. Knowledge should be shared, Jake replied. Your people came to help us when they were dying themselves. The least we can do is make sure this never happens to anyone again. Zephyr's crystalline formations glowed brighter with what Jake had learned was a sign of deep emotion. Your generosity honors both our species. We will ensure that this knowledge reaches every world where water is scarce. 2 days later, the rescue ships arrived to find both crews not just alive, but thriving. The water condensation system had collected over 60 gallons of water during their extended operation, more than enough to sustain everyone until help arrived. Commander Sarah Burke of the Federation rescue ship looked at the improvised system with professional admiration. Captain Morrison, this is going to revolutionize survival techniques across the galaxy. Command is going to want a full report on your methods. Jake looked around at his crew, who were preparing to leave the desert world that had nearly killed them. They had started as crash survivors facing certain death, but they were leaving as innovators who had created something entirely new. The real credit goes to my crew, Jake said, and to Zephyr's people who were willing to work with us even when they were dying. This system only exists because 2 different species were willing to trust each other. As the ships prepared for departure, Jake took one last look at the condensation system they would leave behind. Future travelers who found themselves stranded on this world would discover not just water collection equipment, but proof that impossible situations could be overcome through cooperation and human ingenuity. The story of the crash on the waterless world would spread throughout the galaxy, carried by both human and alien voices. It would become more than just a tale of survival. It would become a symbol of what could be accomplished when different species shared their knowledge and refused to accept defeat. Jake Morrison and his crew had done more than just survive their ordeal. They had demonstrated that humans possessed something valuable to offer the galaxy, the stubborn determination to find solutions where none seemed to exist, and the willingness to share those solutions with anyone who needed them.